Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless Official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Holden Novak had spent months crafting the perfect facade, a charming smile, a polished exterior, a quiet, calculated charisma that made him instantly trusted by nearly everyone in Genoa City. He was the man who always said exactly the right thing, who knew how to look genuinely concerned, who leaned in just enough to appear invested without crossing the line into suspicion. But behind those carefully measured eyes, behind the smooth voice and disarming laugh, there was a storm of secrets darker than anyone could imagine. No one had ever truly questioned who Holden really was. They only saw the version he wanted them to. Until now. Because it was Nate Hastings, sharp, intuitive, relentless Nate, who would stumble into the truth, unraveling a lie so massive it would shake the city to its core. It began with a file. A simple file. A folder mislaid, buried beneath reports in Nate's office at Chancellor Winter's, a mistake that Holden never would have allowed if he hadn't been flustered, distracted, spiraling under the pressure of a truth too heavy to hide anymore. Nate hadn't meant to see it. He hadn't meant to open it. But when the corner of a birth certificate peeked out from under a stack of routine paperwork, curiosity tightened around him like a fist. A name he knew. A signature he recognized. A mother's name he had never expected to see in this context, Audra Charles. And a father's name covered by a sticky note, folded up as if someone couldn't bear to look at it. Or didn't want anyone else to. Heart pounding, Nate peeled back the note. And there it was. Clear. Unavoidable. Impossible. Father, Holden Novak. A chill ripped through him, so fierce it felt like winter itself had burst into the room. Holden? Holden, who'd convinced everyone he was a victim of circumstance, a misunderstood man trying to start over. Holden, who had fooled Audra, Claire, Nikki, Kyle, and half the town simply by being what they wanted him to be. And then, Nate's breath caught, one more detail he hadn't anticipated. A name. The name of the child. A daughter. Hidden. Protected. Secret. And very much alive. Nate staggered back, the truth detonating through him like an explosion. Audra had a daughter. Audra had a daughter with Holden. And not a single soul in Genoa City knew. This wasn't just a secret, this was a bomb ready to go off. Because suddenly every interaction, every tense conversation, every odd look Audra had exchanged with Holden made horrifying sense. The bitterness. The tension. The fear. She wasn't just avoiding him, she was terrified of him. Terrified of what he might do. Terrified of what would happen if the truth ever came out. And now it had. Nate swallowed hard, trying to steady himself, but his pulse hammered like a war drum. Holden's mask wasn't just slipping, it was shattering. Because buried in the bottom of the file was the final confirmation, a court-sealed custody agreement, one Holden had fought dirty to obtain. One he had signed under an alias. One that proved, without question, that Holden had manipulated, threatened, and cornered Audra into giving up any leverage she might have had. Nate felt ice settle over him as he realized exactly what kind of man Holden was, controlling, dangerous, calculated, and ruthless enough to trap Audra in a nightmare she'd never escaped. And while Nate stood there, absorbing the truth, Holden himself was steps away in the hallway, listening. Watching through the crack of the door. His eyes, usually warm and steady, turned cold and sharp like blades forged in the dark. Nate knew too much. Far too much. And Holden wasn't the kind of man who let threats walk away. But Holden underestimated Nate Hastings. Because even as fear curled through him, Nate's mind sharpened. He thought of Audra, her evasiveness, her emotional walls, her moments of raw vulnerability she never let anyone see. He thought of her sharp business mind faltering when Holden was around, her hands that trembled when she believed no one was watching, the way she recoiled at any hint of her past being brought up. She wasn't heartless. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't the villain people wanted to paint her as. She was a mother. A mother who had been forced to bury the most painful truth of her life. And now Nate knew. And knowing meant he had a responsibility to act. The air felt too thick, too suffocating as he gathered the papers, clutching them to his chest. He needed to find Audra. He needed answers. But more than that, he needed to protect her. Because whatever Holden was hiding, Nate was certain this wasn't the end of it. This was only the beginning, the first thread in a web so intricate it might take down anyone who touched it. He stepped into the hallway. And there Holden stood. Smiling. Calm. Too calm. Find something interesting? Holden asked smoothly, leaning against the wall as if they were old friends sharing a casual moment. But his eyes were dead. Hollow. Predatory. Nate didn't blink. You lied, he said quietly. About everything. The mask slipped for a split second, just long enough for Nate to see the monster underneath, the one who hid behind the perfect smile. Careful, Holden murmured. You're stepping into places you don't belong. But Nate stepped forward anyway, chest tight with fury and purpose. You used her. Manipulated her. Used her fear against her. And now you want to pretend you're innocent? Holden's jaw twitched. Audra made her choices. You took her choices, Nate shot back, realizing even as he said it that it was the truth. Audra had been backed into a corner so tightly she had no air left to breathe. Holden didn't deny it. His smile widened, slow, serpentine, chilling. Some secrets, he whispered, are better left buried. For everyone's sake. Nate felt every hair on his arms rise. That wasn't a warning. It was a threat. And he knew then, Holden was far more dangerous than anyone understood. Meanwhile, across the city, Audra Charles stood in her suite at the GCAC, staring at the photo she kept hidden in the lining of her purse. A little girl with dark curls. Hazel eyes. A grin so bright it could shatter shadows. Her daughter. Her heart. Her greatest joy, and her greatest fear. She whispered her daughter's name under her breath, voice breaking, wishing she could hold her, wishing she could bring her to Genoa City, wishing she could undo the moment she let Holden back into her orbit and reopened a wound that had barely scarred over. Audra had lived every day terrified that the truth would surface. Terrified that Holden would use their child as leverage. Terrified that someone would uncover what she had fought so hard to protect. But she never expected it to be Nate. And she never expected Nate Hastings, a man who had every reason to walk away from her, to be the one who finally saw her truth. But just as she tucked the photo back into her purse, there came a knock. Sharp. Urgent. Unmistakably Nate's. She opened the door, and before she could say a word, she saw it in his eyes. He knew. All of it. Her breath punched out of her. Her knees nearly buckled. Audra, Nate whispered, holding out the file that held her entire world. Why didn't you tell me? Tears burned her eyes, tears she never let anyone see. Because, she choked out, Holden doesn't forgive. And he doesn't forget. Nate stepped inside, closing the door behind them. Then we'll make him. Audra shook her head violently. You don't understand. He will do anything, to keep control. This isn't just about me. This is about her. Nate softened, moving closer. Then we protect her. Together. The word together cracked something in her, a wall she had built so high she'd convinced herself it was impenetrable. But downstairs, unseen, unnoticed, Holden stood at the bottom of the staircase, phone in hand, listening to every word through the device he had planted hours earlier. His expression, flat, frozen, terrifying, turned into something darker than rage. Something colder than hatred. Something lethal. They thought they could expose him. They thought they could take his daughter away. They thought they could rewrite the story he had written in ink and blood. But they were wrong. Because Holden Novak wasn't finished. And now that his secrets were unraveling, he was prepared to burn Genoa City down before he let anyone take what was his. Nate's revelation had cracked open a truth that Audra had spent years suffocating under, but the fallout was only beginning, and as the weight of it threatened to crush her, something in her shifted. She had spent so long running, hiding, managing the chaos, calculating every breath she took just to survive Holden Novak. But as she stared at Nate now, Nate, who held her secret with trembling hands but unwavering determination, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of rescue. And that terrified her more than Holden ever had. Because rescue required trust. Rescue required vulnerability. Rescue required letting someone else in. And for Audra Charles, that was far more dangerous than anything Holden could do to her. She swallowed hard, every part of her body trembling. Nate stepped forward, so gently it almost broke her. No one approached Audra gently. No one saw her as someone who needed gentleness. "Tell me everything," Nate said quietly. His voice wasn't accusatory. It wasn't judgmental. It was steady, grounding, urgent, but safe. She shook her head. "I can't. Holden, he'll destroy us." Nate stepped even closer, placing the file on the table as though setting down a bomb. "He's already trying. And the only way we stop a man like him is by bringing everything into the light." Audra let out a hollow laugh. "You don't know what Holden is capable of." Nate's eyes darkened. "Oh, I'm starting to." She stared at the floor, fingers twisting together in a knot of fear. "Do you know what the custody agreement says?" Nate didn't answer, he didn't need to. The horror in his expression told her he'd read every word. "Then you understand," she whispered. "Legally, he has all the power. All of it. And if he finds out she's not where he believes she is," Audra's voice cracked. "He will take her, Nate. He will take her, and he will disappear." Nate felt a cold punch to his gut, but he forced his voice to stay strong. "Then let's make sure he never gets the chance." But upstairs, hidden behind the door of a private suite, Holden Novak tightened his grip around the phone he was using to listen. The tiny device he'd planted in Audra's room was proving more useful than he'd expected. He heard every whisper. Every confession. Every trembling breath Audra took. And with each word, a darker smile crept across his face. So that's how she wanted to play this. Nate Hastings was meddling. Audra was panicking. They thought they could outsmart him. They thought they could take his daughter away. They thought they could win. Holden set his jaw, his expression turning icy. He wasn't the type of man who raised his voice. He didn't scream, didn't lash out recklessly. No, Holden was patient. Methodical. A strategist of human weakness. And now that he knew exactly how cornered Audra felt, exactly how far Nate was willing to go, he planned to use it. Every word they spoke, every step they took, would now feed directly into his next move. Downstairs, Nate lifted Audra's chin, making her meet his gaze. "Where is your daughter?" he asked gently. Audra swallowed, torn between trust and terror. "Safe," she whispered. "Far from Genoa City. Far from him." Nate exhaled heavily, relief mixing with dread. "Audra," he said quietly, squeezing her hands, "I'm on your side. No matter what. I'm not going to let him hurt you. Or her." Audra's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You say that now," she whispered. "But once Holden starts tightening the screws, once he starts manipulating the people around you, once he realizes you're a threat, he won't stop. Not until you regret ever getting involved with me." Nate's jaw set with unshakable resolve. "Then let him come." Audra stared at him, breath trembling, overwhelmed by the certainty in his voice. No one had ever stepped between her and danger like this. No one had ever chosen her. The silence between them pulsed with an intensity neither of them had the strength to break. Until the doorknob shifted. Audra froze. Nate instantly moved in front of her. The door opened, but instead of Holden, it was Jill Abbott Winters, storming in with the kind of authority only a legend could command. "Nate," she snapped, "I need a word." Then she saw the file on the table. The panic on Audra's face. Nate's protective stance. And Jill's sharp, seasoned instincts locked onto the truth like a hawk. "What the hell is going on here?" Jill demanded. Nate exchanged a brief glance with Audra. They didn't want her involved, but it was too late. Jill stepped deeper into the room, eyes pinning both of them. "Someone talk," she ordered. Nate breathed out slowly. "Jill, this is bigger than work. Bigger than any company. Someone's in danger." Jill's entire demeanor shifted, not softer, but fiercer. Jill Abbott was many things, but weak was not one of them. "Who?" "Audra," Nate said simply. Jill's eyes cut to Audra, narrowing. "What kind of danger?" Audra pressed her trembling hands to her mouth. "The kind I never wanted anyone else to face." Jill's tone turned razor-sharp. "Does this have anything to do with that man? Holden Novak?" Audra flinched. Which was more answer than words could give. Jill moved closer, crossing her arms. "Tell me what he did." Nate hesitated, unsure how much to say. But Jill wasn't waiting. "If one of my people is being threatened," she snapped, "I need to know the full picture. Now." Audra let out a shaky breath. "He's the father of my daughter. A daughter no one knows about. And Holden, he's dangerous, Jill. More dangerous than you realize." Jill froze, eyes widening with shock, but only for a second. Then the executive in her locked back into place. "Where is the girl now?" "Safe," Audra whispered again. "But Holden will come for her if he finds out I told anyone." Jill's gaze softened just slightly. "He won't find out," she said firmly. "And he won't touch you. Not while I'm alive." Nate felt something flare in his chest, hope. Audra felt something else, terror. Because she knew Holden. And she knew he wasn't afraid of powerful women. He was attracted to them. And he loved breaking them. Outside her room, unseen by all of them, Holden stepped away from the door, his face unreadable as he slipped his phone into his pocket. Jill Abbott Winters had entered the chat. Interesting. Very interesting. If she wanted to make this a war, Holden was more than ready. Back inside, Audra sank into a chair, burying her face in her shaking hands. Nate knelt in front of her. "Hey," he whispered, "look at me." She didn't. She couldn't. "Audra," he murmured again, his voice firm but warm. "You're not alone anymore." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her gaze. And Nate smiled, not cocky, not confident, but tender. "We protect the people we care about," he said softly. "And I care about you. More than you know." Audra's breath hitched. Emotion swelled in her chest so intensely it hurt. She had spent her whole life fighting for herself, relying on no one, trusting no one, believing no one would ever choose her unless they wanted something from her. And now here was Nate. Choosing her. Because of who she was, not what she could offer. She reached out, touching his hand, fragile as a flower in frost. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "I don't deserve you." Nate shook his head gently. "Everyone deserves someone who sees them." "What if Holden wins?" Her voice broke. "What if he takes everything from me again?" Nate squeezed her hand, his voice steady and strong. "Then he'll have to go through me first." Jill watched them silently, her expression a mixture of worry and calculation. She didn't like being blindsided. She didn't like threats to her employees. And she certainly didn't like men who preyed on vulnerable women. "Audra," Jill said, her tone unexpectedly gentle, "we need a plan. And we need one fast." Audra nodded, wiping her eyes. "He can't know that we know," Nate said. "Not until we figure out our next step." But even as he said it, a cold dread began to creep up his spine. Because if Holden had been paranoid enough to hide Audra's daughter and manipulate custody agreements, he was paranoid enough to be listening. And he was. Holden walked calmly toward the elevator, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But inside, every thought, every move, every muscle was beginning to tighten with precision. Nate Hastings thought he could expose him. Jill Abbott Winters thought she could outmaneuver him. Audra thought she could escape him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As the elevator door slid open, Holden stepped inside, letting out a slow, controlled breath. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't shaken. He was simply adjusting. Realigning the board. Resetting the pieces of the game he had created long before any of them knew they were players. Because there was one unshakable truth about Holden Novak: he never lost. And now, Nate, Jill, and Audra were about to learn exactly what happened when someone tried to outsmart him. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. And Holden smiled. A smile that could freeze blood. A smile that promised the nightmare was far from over.